So today I'm going to talk about something that I've held as a belief for a while. My title is a bit clickbaity, but it's also pretty accurate. I don't want this to come across as offensive, my belief on. So my main issue with transgender people falling on the same label as lesbian, gay and bisexual is that the main thing that separates them is transgender will require treatment as a medical condition. And I feel like this means that it holds a lot more issues and there are a lot more specific needs trans people have that same-sex attracted people just do not experience. By having them all under one label, this causes actually quite a lot of confusion and misattribution. Another issue I have with it is that it's forced something that is a medical condition, specifically a neurological disorder, to be pushed into the limelight. It seems like everyone and their mother has an opinion on trans people, and debates like the bathroom debate and if dating people who are trans or not dating them is transphobic just seems incredibly petty when people are facing things like being kicked out of their houses, not being able to access medical resources, being killed in certain countries or attacked, to then go and bring this to everyone. And I think it's incredibly disrespectful that even things like who is allowed to use the label seems to be the main brunt of discussion when it comes to trans people. Whereas with other LGBT identities, it seems to be a lot more focused on who they are and their rights, and giving them rights that they don't have. For instance, pushes toward same-sex marriages or equality under the law for things such as visiting rights for hospitals. Whereas with trans people, a lot of it seems less focused on that. Now, this may just be my personal experience with this kind of community, but I've always found that it stands out a lot more with what people discuss. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with activism in its existence, and wanting to make minorities' lives better is a very good thing. But I find that by putting it under this label and creating this kind of predetermination of what it has in common with LGBT people, then it kind of dilutes resources and directionality in movements for how it can specifically help trans people. If you're focusing on something like allowing all gay people and bisexual people to get married, how is that helping trans people? They seem very other in a lot of the discussions for LGBT people. Obviously, there are overlaps. Not all trans people are straight, so they still apply to them, but it is not specifically because they are trans, and that's where I find it gets a bit muddled. Because I'm sure there are LGBT people out there who are autistic. I use this as an example because it's also a neurological disorder, and that also requires management and certain treatments. Not to the same degree, but they're still there. And so, just because someone is gay and autistic, or lesbian or bisexual and autistic, it doesn't mean you need to specifically make things for LGBT autistic people. You can fall under numerous categories that require different helps. And I think often, because the LGBT movement is so big, people kind of want it to encompass everything. For instance, there were pushes to include intersex people. And again, intersex people have a medical condition. Their needs are different from gay people. So trying to force this one movement to focus on the needs of everyone just because they're a minority actually makes things a bit more difficult. One of the other issues I have is that by pushing trans people into having an identity as a trans person, it puts a lot of weight on you that doesn't really exist for other medical conditions. I know there are elements of it to other medical conditions, and that people tend to adopt the label of their condition to themselves, but when it comes to medical disorders, making that part of your identity can be quite harming, especially if it's having a negative effect on you. because you see it as so entwined with yourself that it's incredibly hard to break free of any issues you have with it. For instance, for a lot of people who have depression, their identity of being a depressed person can hold them back, because it creates this sense that it's an innate part of yourself that you can't get over or you can't manage. And this attachment to these labels can also make it quite hard for you to move on. I'm aware of the historical reasons behind trans people being part of LGBT. They have been there since the beginning, and I'm not saying no trans people should be allowed, but I think it needs to be treated as a separate form of activism. And that by constantly including it, it is creating more confusion, and also means resources can't necessarily be allotted in the same way. Being born attracted to the same sex is not the same as having your brain completely wired wrong and having to constantly be on hormones for the rest of your life so you can just realign that and fix that. I don't know how to say this without seeming a bit offensive, but with being LGB, there's nothing in you that needs to be fixed. Whereas with being trans, there is an issue that needs to be fixed. And having these two categories of people together just seems incredibly confusing for a lot of people. As I said before, there is overlap, so obviously excluding trans people forever is not what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of specifically dropping the push for that kind of activism within that particular sphere of activism away to its own separate one, where perhaps certain needs and certain issues could be better highlighted and looked at, because they're no longer being held as part of something else. And as I said, being LGB has a lot in common. Being same-sex attracted will have the same difficulties, whereas being trans won't. So it just seems like a more logical split. Because then you could have trans activism that pushes medical rights, that pushes more specific rights for trans people, and then you can have the rights that are more specific for gay people. Now, obviously, there are still overlaps with this. Both face being discriminated against in the workplace in certain areas, in how they can get married, all things like this. But by forcing them to constantly be together, it often seems like it forces them to be a part of the same minority, when often they're not. And it also makes any help that they're getting to be one size fits all. So if you're creating a law to protect LGBT people, well, the thing they have in common is being LGBT, not that they're all same-sex attracted or that they're all transgender. And that makes it quite a weak law, I think, because if it's just LGBT people, then that's open to interpretation and change. Whereas just saying same-sex attracted or transgender people seems to be a lot more cemented in what it means. Also, going back to this idea of it being in the limelight, trans people are less than 1 in 1,000. And as I said, everyone on that aunt has opinions on how they are meant to exist. And I know a lot of trans people find this exhausting, because the problem with it being pushed alongside LGBT people and activism is it forces you into the limelight. And I know this also applies to LGBT people, but I know a lot of trans people who just want to live their lives. And if it wasn't for this push, for it being so mainstream now to talk about, they'd just be able to live their lives. They'd have a medical condition, It would be up to them if they wanted to be known as being a trans person or if they just wanted to be known as being a person. And this constant pushing it in the media and in activism kind of creates this precedence that people need to inadvertently out themselves. Of course, not everyone does, and some people do have pride in being trans in their own way. But I think there are a lot of people who were kind of happy when no one really knew or understood what they were, because they could just pass as being the same as anyone else who wasn't trans. And this kind of hyper-focus has forced doubt into people, where people are constantly looking at others and wondering if they're transgender or not, when in fact it shouldn't really be as relevant as if you're diabetic or you have autism or anything else in your medical history. I'm aware it's very unlikely that anything like what I want will ever come about. These are just my views on the subject, and I'm aware they're relatively countercultural, and I don't really expect anything to change. It's just something that's been on my mind for quite a long time. I've spoken about it before, and when I explain myself, I find people aren't necessarily aggressive towards the idea and understand it, so I'm hoping this will receive the same reception. But I am very worried that this will be misconstrued. I have nothing against trans people. This is purely talking about what political and activistic groups they lie in, and what would be the best course of action for giving the most amount of help. I hope that's come across in this. I may have been a bit all over the place, but hopefully you get the gist of what I'm trying to say, and it's what I wanted it to mean. So this is another very serious video, I think. I've been doing a lot more of them recently with trying to make videos weekly, because just sitting down and talking about something I'm passionate about is the thing I like doing most. So if you like this video, give it a like, and if you want to yell at me because you think my opinions are wrong, that's what the comment section is for. And of course a follow, subscribe, and of course a subscribe would be nice, just because maybe you want to hear more of me. Bye!